So, Maud, thank you, first of all, so much for coming here and being with us and agreeing to talk to this audience about your experiences. And I guess that I'd just like to start off by saying, not only welcome, but could you tell me a little bit about your childhood and how you grew up and how you came to be in this situation?
Thank you. Well, as I said, I was born in the Netherlands, and I lived there with my parents. My mother had originally come from Germany, from Frankfurt am Main. She had come to the Netherlands for a party and met this nice young man. And love was in the air. They were married, and she also moved, of course, to the Netherlands. And my Dutch grandfather had restaurants. He had a restaurant at our hometown, but he also had kiosks. And I always have to explain, a kiosk in the Netherlands is not like a kiosk, here it was more like a newspaper stand at various train stations all through the Netherlands. And my dad learned to be a chef and worked for his father and ran the restaurant in our hometown. And as you know, Hitler rose to power in Germany, and things started to happen very quickly. And my parents were very concerned because my mother's parents were still living in Frankfurt am Main. And as you mentioned, many had come to the Netherlands thinking they would be safe. And my dad took the train, went to Frankfurt am Main, told them, pack a few things, you're coming to live with us, you'll be safe. And my German grandparents came to live with us. But more and more things started to happen. And I started school. I went to a public school, pretty close to my home. And I enjoyed school so much. And my teacher was Mrs. Schnell, who had also escaped from Germany. He was now my teacher at the school. But as time went on, of course, we were invaded and things started to change very rapidly in the Netherlands. And at first it was peaceful, but more and more. And the very first thing order was that everyone who was Jewish had to register. Everybody did. And my parents did too. Who would have known what this was going to be used for in the end? And more things started to happen. Jews couldn't go on public transportation. All of a sudden, even though we were Dutch citizens like everyone else, but it became very restricted. I remember my grandmother being in the hospital. She had had a heart attack, and signs were all over parts, forbidden for Jews, forbidden, Jews not wanted. So many places. It became very, very difficult. My grandfather and my father had to take in a Nazi into business so they could be watched. And life started to become very difficult for the Jewish population. And of course, as I said, I started school, and again, another restriction came out that no Jewish child may attend public school. And I had to leave school, but I was only 5.5 years old, almost 6, didn't really understand why. But then another regulation had come out, and it said everyone who is 6 years old and older has to wear the yellow star. Well, I was so excited because I had just turned 6, and I could wear this just like all the big people. I did not understand. My mother was so happy. My sister was only 4. But she wanted one too and did the usual crying and carrying on and temper tantrums. So she had one too. And I even remember going to visit my grandmother in the hospital. And I realized then, of course now, not then, but now, that my mother had said, it's kind of warm out. Let's take off our jackets because we wanted to cut through a park because they're taking our cars. We were not allowed to take public transportation. So by taking off our jackets, we took off the stars and could take a shortcut through the park. But it became more and more difficult. And in my hometown was one synagogue, and the rabbi called the whole congregation together on a Sunday afternoon and read a letter from the German command. And it said, we have wonderful news for you, the Jews of Amersfoort. We're going to take you away from the war scene because war had started, that we're going to have trains taking you to the east. It'd be wonderful, because the parents, the fathers and mothers can get jobs again. The children can go back to school. And everybody's saying, yeah, but east? No city, no country. So everybody was kind of, what is this? So as my parents left, they snuck into a Christian friend's house. I think he was the deputy mayor, because we were not allowed to visit our Christian friends, nor were they allowed to visit us. So my parents snuck in his house, and there she saw that same letter on his desk. And she said, well, she wasn't sure. Maybe he was working for the resistance. Maybe he was collaborating with the Nazis. So she got up enough nerve and said, Kees, how come you have this letter? And he said, well, I'm working for the resistance. And we have been going all over the Netherlands asking Christian families, if the need should arise, would you accept and hide Jewish children? The children are our first priority. And he said, I have an address for you. He said, I can't tell you who they are. I can't tell you anything about them. I think the only thing he said, they lived on a farm. And think about it. I don't have anything for you, just the children. And we have to know by tomorrow morning. And I realize now as a parent myself, what a difficult decision to make, to let your children go to total strangers knowing you may never see them again. But my parents agreed. And I remember my mother sitting me down. I'm now 6.5 years old. And she said, I've got such good news for you. You and your sister are going on a vacation to a farm. And I'm so excited living in the city to go to a farm. And she said, Mom, take your vacation for a couple of weeks. Dad and I will go on our vacation and we'll stop by the farm and pick you up again. So I don't remember. And, the problem is that you just don't ask a lot of questions. Now there were some things that I wish I had known why certain things were done. But I remember my mother packing a little suitcase for each of us. And I guess my father was told to bring us to a certain house in the neighborhood. And I remember walking with my father was walking with suitcases. We had our bicycles, got to this house. And at the garden gate, he gave me the 2 suitcases and said, take very good care of your little sister. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. We went in this house. I didn't know the people, but they were very nice. And we had dinner and they had children and they put us to bed there. And about 2:00 in the morning, they woke us up and they said, hurry up and get dressed. Because this gentleman, his name was Jan Canis, was going to take us to the farm. He worked for the resistance. Of course, I didn't know at that time. But we got dressed and this is what had to happen. We couldn't leave from my hometown. We had to walk through the woods, and I remember it was pitch dark, and I was a big girl because I had my own flashlight now, and I was very busy picking blueberries, and I remember he was getting very upset with me, like we had a train to catch, I guess, so, but anyway, by daylight, we did arrive in the next town, because leaving from my hometown, everybody knew us. So at this town, nobody knew us, and we took a train, and indeed, we arrived on the farm. But it was such madness because there was German soldiers everywhere. And all these farms were located along a major highway, 1940 major highway, 1 lane this way, 1 lane that way. And all the farms were along, and in the back were all the fields. And I don't remember much other than they took us to the back of the farm, and the wheat had not been cut. And here they wear the traditional Dutch costumes in this area, very, very deeply religious Christians, very poor farmers. But they wear the traditional Dutch costumes and they speak a dialect. And here are 2 little girls with their city dresses. So I guess at that moment they didn't know quite what to do with us. So they must have told us we're playing hide and go seek or something, that the wheat had not been cut. It was over my head, that we were to hide in the wheat field. And I remembered, and they said, just don't walk in like this, kind of zigzag in so you don't leave a path. And I remember taking my sister by the hand. They said, oh, it looks like it's going to rain. Here's an umbrella. And I took my sister by the hand, other hand I had the umbrella, and we wandered into this wheat field. And we weren't there very long, and my sister started to cry. She wanted her mommy. She was only 4.5 years old. And then it started to rain, so I opened the umbrella. Now you could see an umbrella for about 20 miles around, and a child crying. Obviously, it wasn't a good hiding place, so they took us out. And that evening, this couple who were in their 60s, had never had children. They were willing to risk their lives because anyone who was caught hiding Jews also would be taken away. And I remember that very first evening, they sat me down. I'm 6.5 years old, and they said, we're going to tell you something that you must remember no matter who asks you. Who are you? So they said, you are supposed to be our nieces who have been bombed out of a city, and you're now staying with us. So since you're our nieces, you have to call us aunt and uncle. And your last name is going to be our last name, which was Spronk. And your first name, well, my first name in English, it's pronounced Maud. In Dutch, it's pronounced Mout. It's very unusual. Your first name is Margie. So I became Margie Spronk, and my sister Rita became Rika Spronk. You can't go to school here because we're afraid you might say something to a classmate, and they may go home, and parents may be Dutch Nazis, so you cannot go to school. And you have to stay in the house until you remember who you now are. And they had to go out every day to work the farms. And they said, don't answer a knock on the door. Stay away from windows. So I don't know how long it took, but evidently I finally remembered who I am now in. And we were allowed to go out with them into the field. So it was very difficult. I realize now, I look at it as an adult, but I really didn't know exactly what was going on other than I must remember this no matter what. And we were allowed to go with them to church. And even one day after church, we went to visit, and we called them aunt and uncle. We went to aunt's sister's farm. And we were so happy because who was hiding there? But my Jewish kindergarten teacher from my hometown, she and her husband. So every Sunday we went there, and she was beginning to teach us how to read and write. One day we didn't go anymore. Someone had revealed their hiding place, and I found out many years later after the war what happened. A truck came on Aunt's sister's farm and searched the house, couldn't find anyone. Then they went outside exactly to that haystack where they were hiding underneath and took them, and took her son, and she said, you have to take me. They took her son. And eventually what happened, they were taken to a place, because Nazis kept very accurate records of everything. They were taken to a place to be processed, but one night Dutch Nazis came in and took them all outside and murdered them. And eventually they were buried there, and now they are buried in a regular cemetery. But it became very difficult, and I guess it was very difficult for a child that age to really understand. And I know one day we went to another farm for the day and came back, and I knew something had happened. And I guess I was rather inquisitive. I kept asking. So in the evening, Uncle took me outside at dusk, and he looked around. There were no German soldiers walking around, and took me to one of the barns. And it was all open on one side. You could look right into the next farm. And although our wood was there, because there was no gas, no electric, and also living with us was Aunt's brother, who was a wooden shoemaker. So there was a lot of wood. So Uncle looked around. There were no German soldiers he could see. He cleared away the wood, and it was like a trap door. And he opened it up, and I looked inside, and there was a young Jewish boy hiding there. And he introduced me to him. I had not seen him at all before. And then we went back into the farmhouse, and then Uncle said that once a day I was to bring him something to eat, but be very careful that nobody sees you. I'm now 7.5. And nothing happened till one day I had gone, and they had a few steps down. I had a pot of food, and he ate. And then when he was done, I took the pot and went up the couple of steps, and I looked, and there were half a dozen German soldiers just standing there. And I didn't know. It was so obvious of what was happening. I didn't know what to do, and pretended that they weren't there. And I put the trapdoor down, covered the wood, picked up the pot, and they still stood there. And then I had to turn my back. And I prayed, because I knew I was going to be shot right then and there. But nothing happened. I came in the house, I was hysterical. And they said they had to move him immediately, and these soldiers just walked away. Did nothing. And then they said, didn't say anything, but they're going to tell a superior officer they're going to come back and get all of us. But no one ever came back. But every night I went to bed and prayed, because I knew if they came back, it was my fault. And I realized as I got older what happened here. These were men who had been drafted into the army. They were fathers. They were not Nazis as such, and never told a soul of what they had seen. And in essence, saved our lives.
It just brings to mind the incredible danger that the people who were guiding you, did they at that point, or did you ever have to move again, or were you able to?
Yeah, Uncle died one evening, just right in front of me, had a heart attack and died. And the resistance, they were always in touch. I never saw them, but I found out later on they were. And they said, and Uncle died, and he was buried on my birthday. And I always remember that. And they said, well, you can't run the farm now, so we have to find another address for the girls. So she said, no, I'm keeping them. And if their parents survive, I'll return them to their parents. If not, I'm going to raise them. And we stayed until after Christmas and night. We went into hiding in the summer of 1942. It's now after Christmas 1944. Two strangers, and we were allowed to stay on the farm, and a nephew came and ran the farm. That one day, two people came in and said, you have to leave right now. Evidently, it had been revealed who we were and where we were. And we were taken to another house overnight, and yet to another family in a little, very medieval fishing village, Elber. And this is, as you mentioned, was during the hunger winter. On the farm, it wasn't too bad because we were able to hoard some food. But now we're in this fishing village, and there was nothing to eat. And it was right on, it used to be an inlet from the North Sea. It was now a lake. All the fishing villages were along the coast, and had been closed off. The Dutch liked to reclaim land, had built a dike across from one province to the other, closed off that huge part of the North Sea, and the water started to change with rivers coming in with fresh water and salt water. Most of the fish died. And I do a lot of speaking, especially to students, and I'll usually ask them, well, what do you think this fish was? And they come up with everything. The other day, somebody came up with goldfish. I thought, no, I don't think so. But this family we lived with, he went out every day and fished, and the fish was eel. So we had eel morning, noon, and night. There was nothing else to eat. Now, this time, nobody was going to school, and we spoke the dialect. We had acclimated to the whole area, so we were allowed to be outside. And we used to find big bugs and pull off the legs, put a little stick through it, make a little fire, and eat them because we were so hungry. There was nothing to eat.
And that's the thing. So you managed to survive through this period, and then what happens? How do you understand that the war's coming to an end? Do you have any sense? I mean, you're very young, but you have a sense of that things are perhaps going to change?
Not really, because there were no newspapers or anything. No one was allowed to have a radio, though people made their own radios. There's ways of doing that, and people would sit up late at night in the attics and listen to Radio Orange from England to find out what was going on. And they had said something about an invasion, but I didn't understand. Yeah. And then they started to speak more and more of this. And I remember in the village they said, and of course it took a long time till they finally broke through. Of course, the southern part of the Netherlands was already freed, but the northern part was not, and where we were was not. Until then they said they'd broken through and soldiers, they're going to come. And I remember it was April 1945. And April 18th, they said they've already freed some of the villages. They're coming. On April 19th, 1945, they said they're coming. And they were not coming on the highway. They were coming on a dike along this now created lake. And everybody German soldiers left the village. Everybody's out celebrating, out there with flags, and we're going to be free. And just like that, the German soldiers came back and were very angry that we were celebrating. And they were shooting at everybody. And then they left again. And people went out and retrieved their dead and wounded. And we all stayed. Everybody was inside. And the house, this family who was hiding us lived on the second floor. And I could look out the window where they told me on that entrance, soldiers are going to come in. And they came in on this dike. They did not come on the highway. And all of a sudden, I saw a truck come into the village. And they were all men in blue coveralls, an open truck. And I didn't know who they were, but I found out years later they were Dutch resistance fighters, and they were given the honor of coming into the village first because they knew it was safe. Right behind that came the tanks with the Canadian soldiers, and everybody went crazy. It was, and you have to imagine this very medieval fishing village and these huge tanks, and the soldiers were throwing out their rations because they knew we were starving. They were throwing out whatever they had in the tank that was food. And I remember this family had a daughter. She was about 19 at the time, standing with her. And she caught something, and I didn't know what it was. And she went, no, I don't. So she unwrapped it. And there's this brown thing. I didn't know what it was. So she broke off a piece and shoved it in my mouth. I mean, it was chocolate. So when I finally wrote my book, and it's called Chocolate, The Taste of Freedom. And, but then they decided after a while we should go back to the farm with Aunt and wait to see if my parents came back.
So what happened then? Were you reunited with them there?
Well, what happened was my parents did survive. The day my sister and I went into hiding after my dad had brought us away, Christian friends of my parents came to visit, but they had to sneak in the house. And they got in the house and they said, well, where are the girls? So my parents explained that we had gone into hiding. So they said, well, where are you going to go? And they said, we have no place to go. Because obviously, since everyone had registered, they knew exactly who you were, where you lived, where you worked, etc. So they said, we have no place to go. So they said, stay with us. They had a building. It was like a car dealership with showroom in the front, service area in the back, and they lived in the apartment above it. But they said, the only thing is there's 2 German officers living in one of our bedrooms, because my hometown was a military town, of course, now totally occupied by German soldiers. But my parents said, yes. And my parents lived in their attic for 3 years. And my father could never go outside, because number one, he would be recognized. It's his hometown. Number two, he was of an age where they were just grabbing young men off the street to work in factories in Germany. So my mother would dress as a nurse and go out and try to get food for them. And it was very difficult for her because German was her native tongue. But she would overhear things. And if there was something, then she knew exactly where the people lived who were part of the resistance. She would then stop by there and tell them what she had heard. But my parents survived. Again, the goodness of their friends in hiding them.
So how, now after the war, you've been liberated, you're reunited with your parents. Did you manage to find, again, the families that had helped you? Did you go back to the...
Of course. I remember meeting my parents again. It had been 3 years. Meeting my parents, I remember they were able to hitchhike and everything. They were told where we were now. And I remember the day on the farm. We were standing there with Aunt, hiding behind her, and a man and a woman were standing there. I didn't know who they were. And she gave me a little shove, and she said, that's your mommy and your daddy. Shake their hand. I went up and went like this and went back. And so they decided they better just hang out with us for a while. And after a while, I showed my father some of the toys I had been playing with. I had a secret shelf with toys, which I showed him, and it turned out I was playing with mostly live ammunition, a couple of hand grenades. I never ever saw any of this again because nobody knew about my secret stash that I was playing with. But then after a while, I said to my parents, okay, we'll go home with you. But if we don't like you, we're going to come back and live with Aunt. I'm 9.5 years old. And we went back with my parents. And it was, again, living with people I didn't remember or didn't know.
Yes.
So that was very difficult.
And how long did it take, really, for you to readjust and really start to understand what had happened and how miraculous your survival?
As I got older, learning more and more. And, of course, now I realize how wonderful these people were. Any one of these people who really risked their lives to save us. It didn't matter that I was Jewish and they were Christians. We were human beings. And they felt they had to save us. And many of them also were executed if Jews who they're hiding were found. And I tried to bring this message, especially to students, especially in today's world, I don't talk. I experienced some things that, as a child, no child should experience. And I talk really about how people cared and how important it is to the kindness and sharing and respect through my story of people who risked their lives to save us. And I think I'm forever thankful. And I'm of course, they have all passed away. And I have honored all my rescuers. Both families have all been honored by Yad Vashem in Israel. And their names are on a big tablet there above all the righteous. And I honored them all. The only person who was still alive when this was done was the daughter of the second family. And we were able to give it to her personally. Yeah. And in this little village now, there was a little synagogue, and they have now made it into a little museum also. And it's so hard to explain how I feel about these people saving our lives. I got married, we have 4 children. My daughter Susan's here. 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. And it's all, and I have a PowerPoint that I use, and that's usually the last picture of all my children. And they say, this is because of these people cared so much to save us. This is my family. And I explained to my family tree was just cut off during the war, all these branches, that it's beautiful again. It's growing, and it's got new branches and new flowers. Thanks to these people who cared so much.
It's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for telling us the story and sharing this with us.
Acha.
Yeah.